What's up, guys? Welcome back to the show today. We've got Mr. John Herron from Trinnov joining us to discuss a few updates to the Trinnov platform. What's up, John?
We've been doing a lot of software updates recently. So we've had our hands full. A lot
Yeah,
of
man.
people have been looking forward to this one.
So, what's new? What's new with this update?
Well, it's really just two things. The one that is sort of old news, that is probably easier to dispense with, is Imax Enhanced capability. Again, because of our software platform, it's just a software update as opposed to having to buy new gear. We've actually had it pretty much in the can for a while, but there was basically no content available. So it wasn't real high on our priority list based on urgency. But we were told a little while ago, and now it's public knowledge, that Disney Plus is they've announced that they're going to start streaming in IMAX Enhanced, and I believe it's this month. I'm not absolutely sure about that, but that
Yeah,
obviously made it a little bit more urgent. I don't know how much content is going to be available in IMAX Enhanced, but there'll be at least some.
yeah.
So
Well, it's all
that'll
the
be there.
it's all the Marvel movies right now, but it's not in DTSX audio or IMAX audio.
Well, yeah. So IMAX Enhanced, as far as the audio is concerned, not the video side, but on the audio side, it is a variation. It's a specific instance of DTSX.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a radical departure from other things that we do. It's just yet another format that
Yeah,
we need to support. Because our philosophy is that most most of the people that are watching this podcast are hobbyists and really into it, and of course all want to have the latest and greatest toys. um, a lot of our customers are not hobbyists. They just appreciate really nice stuff,
yeah,
and especially for those folks, they should just be able to pick whatever movie they feel like watching, press play, and have everything work without having to think about really much of anything. Just
right.
play, and how loud do I want it? Good, we're set. And that's one of the reasons why IMAX suddenly became more important for us. And then the other part, which is probably going to engender more conversation, is that with this new software, which is 4.2.16.8, don't ask me why we need so many numbers to describe it, but that's the number. With this new software, we are expanding the capability of all of our surround processors by 4 channels. So, as an example, with the Altitude 16, it now has always had 16 channels of output capability. We can now take it up to 20 if that's something that your customer, that your viewers want to do. The most common application for this, and the thing that sort of drove the development, was people who wanted to do 9 listener level speakers and 6 up above, but they wanted to have 4 subwoofers rather than just the one. And if you're going to use the 4 really productively, in the past, people have resorted to using outboard boxes like a mini DSP or something to split that one bass signal, subwoofer signal, out into the 4, and to coordinate the alignment of the 4 so that you're really getting everything you pay for. And having that extra box just seemed like an unnecessary complication. It was also, as a manufacturer, it's just harder for us to support because we're not mini DSP. So what we've done is the Altitude 16 has 2 digital outputs. There are 4 digital inputs, so let's set those aside. But there are 2 digital outputs. Digital out 1 is just a normal SPDIF coax electrical output, and digital output number 2 is Toslink optical. So what we're doing with this release is we're basically restructuring the inner software so that we can now decode a total of 20 channels, decode and render 20 channels. The channels 17 and 18 will show up on digital output number 1, the coax, and 19 and 20 are available on the Toslink output, digital output number 2. And so with the addition of a couple of just plain vanilla stereo DACs, people can bump up to 20 if that's what they want to do, or just one DAC and bump up to 18, It's pretty flexible.
Yeah, it's crazy. Did that take a lot of work, or has that feature like always kind of been in the works over there at Trinnov?
No, it was a relatively recent idea. Um, Actually, for some people who are more, if they're on our newsletter list or whatever, some of your viewers may know this. Originally, the idea was brought to us from within the R&D department. Um, and, we got our start in pro audio. We have a lot of experience in recording studios and stuff like that. And there is a format in recording studios called ADAT. It's actually derived from the old digital audio tape format. But nowadays, digital audio tape is sort of a thing of the past, but it lives on in this interconnection standard. ADAT DAC, the thing about ADAT is that it can put 4 channels of 96 kilohertz audio onto a single Toslink wire or fiber optic cable. And that seemed pretty cool. And so we started developing that as just an idea, feasibility study, and so forth. We should probably go through the slides that I built. But once we got to a certain point and we started testing it with currently available ADAT machines, some of these ADAT DACs just really didn't behave themselves very well. They wouldn't switch to different sampling rates smoothly or at all. Sometimes it would require the user to go in and manually switch it from 48 for movies to 44.1 for CDs, for example, and that's just not practical. That's not a good user experience. So then we had to fall back and punt a little bit, because the original idea of putting all 4 channels into a single 4-channel DAT or DDA converter just didn't. It turned out to be not as practical as we had thought or hoped. So we fell back and punted and discovered that something that I didn't know until fairly recently. In the past, those digital outputs have always carried whatever information was assigned to channels 1 and 2. So normally it would be left and right, so that you could, if you wanted to use a really fancy DDA converter for your stereo speakers, you could do that, and it all just works automatically. What I didn't know was that those 2 outputs are actually independent of one another. So we can put different information on each. And that's how we got to, a total of 20. And we didn't make people go looking for ADAT DACs that they're probably not familiar with. They can just buy whatever brand of DAC they like.
So you can't use a mini DSP with it and have Trinnov control
Well,
it.
you could, but the goal was to make sure that it wasn't really necessary. So you can do in terms of speaker configuration, you can do a 9.4.6 very easily and still have a channel left over.
Oh, no, meaning like, would the altitude control what's going on with the mini DSP?
Maybe I'm not following you.
Like, I don't know how this would interface, because I don't have. I have
so
way
what we're
too many
trying to do
channels.
is make the addition of a mini DSP to manage your subwoofers.
Yeah.
We're trying to make that no longer necessary and just
But if you
keep
plug
it
the mini
simpler.
if you plug the mini DSP into it, does the altitude know that the mini DSP is on it and can calibrate each individual subs from the mini DSP, or do you still have
No,
to?
that's part of one of the reasons that motivated us to do this, is that we wanted to be able to do all the calibration ourselves, because it's
Right.
a lot easier for the end user. The procedure for using a mini DSP until recently with this new software release was that, well, there are several different ways you can do this alignment, but conceptually, imagine you have 4 subs and they're just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. You measure the output in REW or SMART or something like that of subs number 1 and sub number 2, and they play both of them, and you play with levels and delays until at all frequencies the combination of 1 plus 2 is more than either 1 or 2 by itself. And in a typical room, if you just did a Y adapter of some sort to send the exact same signal to both subs, in a typical room, they'd be supporting each other at some frequencies and actually fighting against each other at others, just based on the way the standing waves work in the room. So this process was one of trying to make sure that every time you add a sub, that it is in fact additive at all frequencies. So you do 1 and 2, and then you do the combination of 1 and 2, play with it until 1 and 2 is always bigger than either 1 or 2. And then once you've got that ready, you measure number 3, add number 3 to the first 2, treat them as though they were 1 sub, and you repeat the process for as many subs as you have to make sure that when all is said and done, all of the subs are working together to provide you the experience you want, rather than some subs working at cross purposes at certain frequencies, right? That's kind of a laborious process that a lot of our customers don't have the patience or maybe the experience to do. By bringing all of this in-house, we can set aside the need for something like an external DSP box and take control of the whole thing ourselves, and hopefully make it a lot easier for people to do 9.4.6 speaker arrangements, as an example. But it's not limited to subwoofers. You can put any information on those that you want.
Right. So how many channels does Dolby Atmos actually support? Is it 64 or 32?
The commercial cinema version, will support as many as 64 outputs. The home version of Atmos that you get on a Blu-ray player or Kaleidoscape or something like that, or streaming off of an Apple TV or a Roku, the home version of Atmos is designed to render to as many as 34 main channels plus an LFE.
Oh, okay.
So,
All right. So then if
yeah,
you
and
bought
we've been
the
doing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so if you bought the 32 and you added the extended 48 extension piece there plus the 4.
Right. So on the altitude, we can actually get into the slideshow. That it might be better to, let's make sure I can do this. There we go. Just to go through this in a more organized way. We normally make the dealer the gatekeeper of software updates, because in at least some systems, when we introduce a new feature, well, like this one is a good example. In most cases, the dealer may have to go out and help take advantage of that new feature. In this case, it's rewiring the system, maybe. In other cases, it might be just modifying the automation system, the control for Crestron or whatever it might be, so as to create a button to take advantage of whatever the new feature might be. So for those kinds of very pragmatic reasons, we normally would ask you to contact your local dealer. They can double check and see if they have to do any work. They will contact us. We can do the software update very easily. Just make sure that the unit is turned on, connected to the internet, and just by way of sort of a belt and suspenders thing, turn the power amps off. And that way, if there is a burp or a click or something like that, it just can't get to the speakers. I've never actually known that to happen, but better to be safe than sorry. So yeah, you can talk to your friendly local dealer. You can send an email to support@trinnov.com with the request that, here's my serial number. Can you give me the update? We can also, in some cases, if the dealer says, look, this guy doesn't have a big fancy Crestron system, he's pretty tech savvy, just let him do the updates on his own. It's very easy for us to set up that particular machine so that you can initiate an update from the interface of the machine itself. So you don't have to involve anyone else. And so what is it? It's the +4 part is, we have 4 more channels that can be used in any way that you would like. They could be used to support extra subs, or they could be used to support extra listener level speakers or upper speakers. It's whatever you're trying to achieve. So with the altitude 16, that goes from 16 to 20. Again, you have to buy a couple of D-to-A converters to do that, but they're available at a huge range of prices and functionalities. With the altitude 32, the altitude 32 comes in 4 different configurations. You can buy it with 8, 16, 24, or 32 channels. And in each of those cases, absent what you were talking about, which was the 48 channel extension, you get an extra 4 channels. So normally those extra 4 channels on the altitude 32 would be available on the AES multi-channel digital outputs. It's on a DB25 connector on the back of the box, but they're also available on the two normal stereo digital outputs of the Altitude 32. So if you have the 8-channel version, it goes to 12. If you have 16, it goes to 20, and so forth. And so taking the 16 as an example, channels 17 and 18 would be on the first digital output, and channels 19 and 20 would be on the second stereo digital output.
All right.
With the Altitude 48, we're taking all 16 of those digital digital channels from the multi-channel digital output, and we're sending those over to the external box that we call the 48 extension, and that will then take you to a point where you can render up to 48 unique channels, and you can manage as many as 64 channels total. The difference between rendering and managing being, management is if you have a very sophisticated base management scheme with a lot of different subs. It's basically, you're not rendering separate channels of information. You're just handling them differently, different levels, different delays, maybe different optimization.
Right.
Or you can use up those extra channels through biamping or triamping, which a number of speaker companies take advantage of, and that just chews up outputs really fast. So
Here's a DAC question for you from Don Hensley. Thanks
sure.
for the super chat, by the way, Don. How are you supposed to match the DACs that are in the Trinnov to the necessary external DAC?
Well, in terms of level and delay and all of that, all you have to do is remeasure the system once it's wired up to take advantage of the new extra channels. You will have to, get the microphone out, put it on a tripod or a mic stand or whatever, and do a new measurement. But if those external DACs have any latency of their own, which most of them do, DSP takes a certain amount of buffering so that it can do what it needs to do. If the DAC itself introduces a latency, from our point of view, that just looks like the speaker is a little further away than a tape measure would indicate. So we automatically handle all of that to make sure that the sound all reaches you at the right time and at the right level. That's just part of a normal calibration. There's nothing special there.
All right. Thanks for the question, Don.
Yeah. I actually sort of talked about this already, but most ADAT converters, which was our original idea, just don't behave as smoothly and nicely as our customers would expect, which is why we had to back up and go a different direction. And that's why we're a little behind schedule on this. We originally thought that with the ADAT implementation, we'd be able to introduce it in the middle of October. And then when we found out that, in fact, most of the ADAT DACs that are out there were making bad noises when they're changing sampling rates and doing things like that, that's when we thought, no, it's not acceptable. We had an ADAT DAC in the R&D department that was working fine, but it's an older one. It's discontinued. It's, we were a little bit surprised at how poorly some of these things behave themselves, but maybe we shouldn't have been. I mean, they're designed for recording studios, and if you're doing mastering, you're only running at whatever rate you're running at. So,
Here's a
but
good
anyway,
question. Depending on what DAC do you get, does that affect the timbre of the audio coming out at all?
Nowadays, it really shouldn't. The difference, back in the 90s, I was in charge of product development for Mark Levinson and Proceed. And back in those days, the difference between a relatively affordable DAC and the kinds of things that we were doing was quite dramatic. And nowadays, there are still differences. A DCS Vivaldi will sound better than, 2 channels of our DACs, as well it should, given the amount of money that's involved. So if you want to do that, fine, we can do that. It's going to be very expensive. But the differences have gotten so small between a competently designed DAC and then like a state-of-the-art DAC that I don't see it as a problem at all. Matter of fact, just recently we had a customer, this was on the stereo side of our business, but I have a customer out in California who has a pair of quad ESL 63s. And your listeners may know that the quads sound great, but they don't go deep in the bass and they don't play loud. So he had added a pair of NTEC subwoofers to his quad ESLs. And integrating them and getting them just right was always a little bit of a challenge. But he got the Amethyst, which is our stereo product, and it can do biamping automatically and very easily. So he got the Amethyst, and he just pulled the microphone out, did the measurements. Everything worked great. He was blown away at the integration and at what the optimizer could do. And then, because he's a high-end guy, he thought, well, I wonder if I could make it sound even better if I spent like $10,000 on an outboard DAC just for the quads. And he actually managed to borrow a really nice DAC from a very reputable company. And he did the experiment, and he discovered that actually he didn't like it quite as well as just using our built-in DACs. So if you want to use very fancy outboard DACs, be my guest. I'm not sure it's necessary, particularly if you are using the extra outputs to support a handful of subwoofers. I'm not sure that you have to spend a ton of money on that DAC. Any DAC can do those frequencies very well.
Makes sense.
So in terms of setting things up, basically you have to install the software, and then it's a whole new configuration. So some of anyone who owns an Altitude is probably already aware of when you change the basic configuration from, say, 7.1.4 to 9.1.4. Anytime you change the basic configuration, the optimizer is not going to assume that you only changed the two things, right? You may have also moved some of the other speakers or upgraded in some other way. So if you make any change at all, we, have designed it so you just pull the microphone out, shoot the room again, and then you're off to the races. With this new +4 software, there are a couple of extra steps that you need to just be aware of. In the setup wizard itself, it's really hard to see, at least on the screen, given the size of what I'm looking at. But there is a button in the setup wizard that says, do you want to use the extra 4 channels? And if so, you press the button and we take care of the rest. If you're doing a manual calibration instead of using the setup wizard, there is an extra step on the sources configuration page. And I think I've got so this is walking through it in more detail. I've already talked about 17 and 18 on coax, 19 and 20 on Toslink. When you add or remove a speaker, you have to remeasure everything. But you can see in the little red box down in the corner that that's where the extra channels come in. This is actually the illustration I was looking for. We have a page in the interface that's called Sources Config. And internally, we refer to those things as profiles, because it's in the consumer world, we tend to think of sources, but in most products, it is at most a definition of, okay, I want you to use this connector, like, number 3 HDMI or SPDIF number 2 or whatever. I want you to use this connector, and maybe the software will let you rename it to Blu-ray instead of HDMI 3. Right, yep. So it's a little bit more user-friendly. But that's about as far as most other products go. In our case, we have this screen that you see here on the right, and we can associate a whole bunch of different things with a particular source, if you will, and hence the name profile. One of the things that we can do that's a very common example, let's say you have different target curves for music and movies. So you have something for music that you just absolutely love, but when you watch movies, you like to have a little extra bass because it's fun, and so you have a different target curve for that. Well, if you do that, one of the things you can do on this page is to associate the movie curve with your Kaleidoscape or your Blu-ray player, and you can associate the music curve with your CD player or with Roon. And that way, you don't even have to think about it. Everything that you're trying to do just happens automatically. Well, in a similar vein, one of the things that you can define when you're defining this profile, which is like a configuration of the machine overall that you want to be able to access with the push of a button, one of the things you can define is which set of output connectors you want to use. are using the digital outputs, the analog outputs,
Right.
various options. And now we just have a new option under there. On the Altitude 16, it's called analog EXT for external. And for any source that you're actually going to be using those extra 4 channels with, you just have to go in and modify it and say, okay, I want you to be able to take advantage of these extra 4 outputs. So you make that choice on the pull down menu and click save for each of the sources, and you're done. On the Altitude 32, as I mentioned, it will take advantage of the extra 4 channels on the AES EBU digital output or on those regular SPDIF type outputs. But it's the same sort of thing. You choose the appropriate connector that says, hey guys, I've got an extra 4 channels, and then press save. And from that point forward, whenever you select that source, it knows enough to take advantage of all the extra goodies that you've installed.
Is there a sound quality difference between going optical out on the 16 versus AES on the 32?
Not one that I would worry about. I mean, back in the 90s when I was at Madrigal, we did critical listening tests, and I did think that AES EBU tended to sound better than Toslink, for example. And there are some technical reasons for that, but those differences are vanishingly small compared to the kind of difference that the optimizer makes, for example. Right. So I frankly don't worry about it very much anymore.
Right, okay.
Let's see. Oh, glad I did this. Actually, a colleague of mine in England built this slide presentation, and I'm glad David did, because I would have forgotten to talk about this. One of the differences between the Altitude 16 and the Altitude 32, actually, I need to back up and explain this. One of the differences between what we do and what everybody else does is that we prefer to process information at whatever the native rate is. So when you're listening to a CD, we're doing all of our signal processing at 44.1 kilohertz. When you're listening to a movie, it's almost all movies are 48K. Some people may have downloaded high-res audio files from places like HD Tracks on the web, and those can be 88.2 or 96 or 176.4 or even 192 kilohertz. And the Altitude 32 does all of those by default, all the way up to 24 bits, 192. However, in order to get these extra channels out of the box, everything will be basically downsampled. The maximum sampling rate will be 96K. So if you play a 192K signal, it'll be internally down-resed by a factor of 2, which you can do very cleanly. And it'll be processed at 96K. So you'll only have, quote unquote, 48 kilohertz worth of bandwidth instead of 96 kilohertz of bandwidth. I don't know too many human beings who can hear either of those, but anyway. So there is this one functional change. The Altitude 16 has always been limited to 96K, but now the 32, if you add all of these extra channels, is also going to be limited to 96K. That also brings up an important point. The reason why the ADAT thing didn't work out was partly because we do native signal processing. Again, the idea being that we'd rather work with the original data rather than a facsimile of the data that has been achieved through sample rate conversion. Mm-hmm. So in most products, when you're listening to a CD, it's 44.1 kilohertz, but that has to be converted to 48 because that's what the DSP chip is running at. And that conversion, especially the fractional conversion from like 44 to 48 instead of 96 down to 48,
right.
The fractional ones are audible. They're not as transparent as the factor of 2 changes. And that's the whole reason why we went to the extra trouble to do native sample rate processing. By the same token, because we're changing our own sampling rate, whenever you change from, say, CD to a movie, you have to have an external D-to-A converter that also does that smoothly. So all you have to do is look for a normal stereo DAC that automatically switches to whatever the required sampling frequency is and handles 44.1, 48, 88.2 and 96, and then you're off to the races.
I would assume a lot of people would be upset about going from 192 down to 96 with the.
I'm sure there'll be a few people, and so I guess those folks will have to decide which one's more important, the 192 or the extra 4 channels.
Right.
We're not forcing anybody to do any of this. It's strictly how you want to use the system.
Yeah. So I would assume if you have hearing like a dog, you probably won't hear the difference.
Yeah, bats and dogs should worry. Yeah. Yeah, and frankly, I know people, including yours truly, have spent a fair amount of money on high-res audio tracks for whether it's HD tracks or some other place, because we want to have, I must have 8 or 9 copies of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue on, different vinyl pressings, different digital releases, high-res digital, you name it. And I have never been able to convince myself that I could hear a difference between, say, 96 and 192. That's not to say that the recordings don't sound different. I just don't know if it's because of the sampling rate or because it was remastered. Because anytime something gets remastered, there are a bunch of changes. So I'm a little bit skeptical, frankly, that people, if you had a totally controlled situation where the only difference was the sampling rate,
Right.
I am not sure that people would hear the difference between 96 and 192.
There are people that claim they can.
Well, yeah, but is it
Yes,
because
there
it
are.
was remastered?
Yeah,
I
probably.
agree
Yeah.
that there are differences in the way these recordings sound. And that much is fairly obvious, but we don't know why.
Yeah. Plus, if you have 32 channels blasting at you all at one time, I really don't think you'll hear a difference
Yeah.
between 96 and 192.
Yeah, and that's someplace where if you're listening on a multi-channel system to a normal stereo recording that you love, the biggest improvement you can make, in my mind, is to go to the Oro 3D upmixer,
Mhm.
because it sounds great with music.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have a kitten who's trying to play with one of the lights over here.
I see it.
So the one limitation is that if you are using all 16 of the digital outputs on an altitude 32, I should say 16 channels of digital output, because it's 8 stereo pairs, obviously, since it's AES EBU. Then, adding 4 on top of the 16 digital outputs, if you're already using all of them, is not part of this release. We're going to be looking to see what we can do on the next round of updates, but that affects a pretty small number of people. It's primarily people who have gone to the 48 EXT, right, the expansion box that allows you to get to as many as 64 channels, or the other place where we see people using all of those digital outputs is, you can sort of see it here in the illustration, is to feed the Meridian 271. Meridian introduced their own proprietary way of distributing digital audio directly to all of their speakers, and they did this years and years ago. And so the idea is it's digital all the way to the speakers. Inside the speakers, there is DSP. There are separate amplifiers for each of the drivers, and they can do all kinds of creative things to make sure that those speakers sound as good as they can possibly sound. All of it internal to the speaker. A couple of years ago, Meridian introduced this new product, the 271, which is kind of like the Star Trek Universal Translator. It goes from a variety of both analog and digital formats and converts whatever you've selected to their proprietary digital format called SpeakerLink. And we do have a fair number of people who are using all 16 outputs of an Altitude 32, all 16 digital outputs of an Altitude 32 to drive as many as 16 Meridian speakers. So for those folks, if they want to go from 16 to 20, that'll be on the next release, because on currently the extra information is on the AES EBU multi-channel output,
Right.
and then it's duplicated on the standard stereo digital outputs. that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally get it.
Okay. And then, actually, I should probably stop here. Um, are if there are any other questions about the +4 software, we can take those
Um,
if you have some.
I don't think we have additional about the extra. When you also connect it to the 48 extension, does that also
Mhm.
down res it as well to 96?
It was the 40. If you go to 48 channels of rendering, that was already a limitation
Oh, okay.
of the 48 channel thing, and that's just a sheer matter of CPU load.
Gotcha.
There are only so many bits that we can throw back and forth at once, and we are using a $500 computer instead of a $5 DSP chip, so we can do quite a bit more than other folks, but there are limitations.
Right, right. Okay. I get you. I get it. Next here, well, here's John. John's buddy on Patreon. He wants to know when's the OSD next release. Slightly off topic, but
I would like to think so, but I'm not really sure. I know that is being worked on. The Cypress HDMI board that is part of all of the current production and has been for quite a while now does support an on-screen display. We have not, frankly, had the time to implement it just yet, but it is on the list, and I know it's being worked on. I don't know exactly when it'll be introduced.
is that just
And it'll be pretty simple. It's not designed to do the initial configuration and calibration. It's really just to let you know when you change the volume, what volume are you changing it to? If you switch sources or listening formats or up mixers, it'll give you basic status updates when you change something, and then wink out again to get out of the way.
got you. I usually I used to think I would use that more often than I did, like with Denon Marantz and stuff like that. But every time I would watch a movie, especially with the wife or something like that, she's like, "What are you doing? What are you touching? What's this on the screen all the time?" So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just ended up turning it off anyways.
yeah. I confess that it's never been a high priority for me.
Yeah,
But if I'm watching a movie or something, I typically use either my iPad or my phone to access the full VNC interface
yeah,
rather than using our little remote control. Because every once in a while, you want to do something that, isn't on the remote control,
yeah. I
like
wish you guys would
tweaking a
just come
target
out.
curve.
Why don't you guys come out
Hmm?
with an actual app instead of having to go into the browser, like an iOS app or something like that?
Well, we do have a Mac. We have an app for the Mac OS that will automatically connect you and set up the VNC connection and all of that. You can download that from our website. We just call it the Trinnov app. Um, I just learned actually about a little over an hour ago that we've just recently hired a new person in the R&D department whose main responsibilities will be to create apps, whether
Oh,
it's
nice.
for Android or iOS or Windows or Mac or whatever. Um, so I think you'll see more of that coming from us in the future.
Right.
We ourselves are sometimes bandwidth limited, as you might imagine.
Uh, well, before being triggered, I'd ask why not sample full 192 with the 4 additionals added. I think you went over that earlier. Yeah,
It's just a matter of processing horsepower.
yeah,
Um, you don't. You always want to have a little bit of headroom so that if the software runs into something that's a little bit more challenging than would normally be the case, you've got the headroom to handle that, and you never hear anything odd happening. And at 124 bits and 192 kilohertz, plus everything we're doing in the optimizer, plus the extra channels, it adds up to the point where it just didn't seem like the smart thing to do. It's
right.
a pretty minor limitation, though, at least as far as I'm concerned. 96K still sounds great.
Oh, when you do the update, will it support widescreen?
Meaning the OSD update?
Yeah. Like,
Uh,
yeah, I'm sure. Of course it would. Never mind.
yeah,
Why would I think it
yeah.
would? Yeah,
It'll just be a very simple
yeah.
text-based thing, probably at the bottom of the screen to let you know that you're changing the source of the volume or the up mixer, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it'll come up for a few seconds, then disappear.
All right. Yeah. All right. So I think that's it for the 4 channels extended.
Okay. And then I did this at the beginning because I sort of got distracted from the presentation. But Imax Enhanced, for your viewers, is not, as you mentioned just before we got on the pod, Shane. There's not a lot of content available right now in Imax Enhanced audio. Disney Plus has announced that they're going to start doing more, so that made it a bigger priority for us. We had most of the work done on this quite some time ago, and it was the Disney Plus announcement that really forced us to push it on through, because suddenly there was going to be at least an appreciable amount of content available.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a bit of additional content that has been announced, and it remains to be seen when we'll get it. But as you said at the beginning, Marvel, which is part of Disney now, most of the Marvel movies are going to be coming out in IMAX Enhanced. I suspect they'll also still have Atmos, so it'll be interesting. You'll be able to compare the soundtracks. But one thing that is a little bit different about our implementation, so for your listeners, IMAX Enhanced audio is a specific instance of DTSX. It was developed by DTS for IMAX. And there are certain things about our implementation that are unique. First of all is that when you're using IMAX Enhanced, normally it's like a 12-channel system, the way it's designed, and that's the information on the disc. With the Neural X upmixer, which is DTS's upmixer, we will be able to expand those 12 channels to take advantage of as many as 30 channels in anybody's room, depending on how many speakers they have available. And I don't believe that anybody else, well, certainly nobody else has that as yet. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do it, frankly, but we'll find out. There's another difference, which may be on the next slide. I should probably check. Okay. Well, yeah, it is sort of on the next slide. Another thing that I had read about, and perhaps you've read it too, in the past, was that DTSX was announced originally as a 12-channel full range. Every channel was full range. There was no LFE in the soundtrack. It was just 12 full range channels.
Right.
Actually, in some of the content that we were given for testing purposes, that looks like it's not really true. It does actually. It's an 11.1 format. It does have an LFE, which makes more sense. But some of the early announcements or press releases or whatever led me to believe, anyway, that it was going to be 12 full range channels, and that was it. And then another part of it was they were advocating for a 70 hertz crossover for bass management, which always struck me as odd. I mean, you should be choosing that frequency based on your speakers and your room, not based on what you happen to be watching at the moment. All right. And then on top of that, they have a feature in IMAX Enhanced called True Bass, which is supposed to beef up the bass. It's really just a bump in the kind of the mid bass area that's designed to make sound bars and fairly modest speaker sets sound a little more impressive than they would otherwise. Because of all of those things, we asked IMAX, and they granted us the ability. We said, look, we have incredibly flexible bass management. It's all set up based on the speakers in the room and what works best in that particular environment. Why would we want to change that? It's only going to get worse if we just go to some sort of arbitrary standard. And they're letting us do that. So in some implementations of IMAX Enhanced, it's just something else to look for. Not everybody can afford an Altitude 16. I get that.
Right.
But if you're buying something else, just find out what they're doing about bass management. At the very least, I would want bass management that was under my control rather than under IMAX's control, and bass management that was really pretty flexible, because all of those channels can be full range. So, and very few people have 12 or more full range speakers in their room.
Right, right. So by default, should IMAX already switch it to full range by like the default?
I'm not sure how other people are implementing it. We were given permission to just kind of continue doing what we already do in
Right.
terms of base management. So that's what we're running with. We firmly believe it's the only approach that makes sense, frankly.
Are those DTSX soundtracks mixed hotter than the standard DTSX?
I'm not sure I have enough experience to comment on that. I think it remains to be seen. I mean, I think I have one IMAX disc, so who knows?
Yeah.
We'll see. It wouldn't surprise me. This goes a long way back, but back when we were talking about 5.1 or 7.1, like back in the 90s, people frequently said, "Oh, DTS sounds so much better. It's more spacious. It's bigger. It's just more fun." And then if you actually did the measurements, if you had a soundtrack that was mixed both ways between Dolby or DTS, typically the DTS mix had 3 dB hotter signals in the surrounds, and that's most of what people were hearing. It
Right,
sounded more spacious because the surround speakers were a little bit louder.
right.
Both systems work really well, and whether IMAX mixers, I think this is more up to the guy who's mastering the soundtrack than it is probably to IMAX. But the guy who's mixing it is going to do what he wants to do. Our job
Well,
is just to make sure it's reproduced accurately.
I've also heard that IMAX Enhanced is the straight theatrical mix. Any truth in that?
Again, it depends on
Yeah.
how the movie was mixed. I mean, Dolby is the 800-pound gorilla, and there are more Atmos capable mixing studios now than all the others combined. That's not to say that we shouldn't be supporting all those others, because again, somebody presses play, it should just work, right? It shouldn't require a lot of involvement on the owner's part. But it's up to the people who are mixing. If you look at Ford versus Ferrari as an example, because right here on YouTube, if you haven't seen it already, there's maybe a 10-minute long kind of mini documentary on how that soundtrack was made, and interviewing two of the people that mastered that soundtrack, and that was all done in Atmos. But if you watch that, you get an idea of the creative possibilities when you're doing one of these sophisticated object-oriented multi-channel mixes. And it really is in the hands of the sound designer more than the format.
So then is a Trinnov the only one that's able to expand beyond the 12 channels? So other
That's my
receivers cannot do that?
understanding, at least as of now. I mean, you could always, I presume other products will be able to array the same information to more than one speaker. So, for example, the left surround channel could go to multiple speakers along the left wall of the room. I don't know that anyone else is doing that, but I'm pretty sure they would. But in terms of being able to take advantage of as many as 30 channels, and sending all those channels, uniquely rendered information that makes sense. We're the only ones right now, because we're the only ones who can combine Imax Enhanced with the DTS Neural X up mixer, as I understand it.
So it also sounds to me that nobody really knows if there's a big difference between IMAX Enhanced DTSX or DTSX.
Well, yeah, we don't have enough experience yet to know, in terms of how people are going to use the tools. Trying to think of a good metaphor. Nothing's coming to me, but I do think it's going to be more in the hands of the people who are making creative decisions,
Right.
and that will probably drive the format that they choose. If they want to do a lot of very sophisticated object-oriented mixing, and that can be rendered to super high spatial resolution over 25 or 30 speakers, they're going to make different mixing decisions than somebody who's mixing for a flat panel TV that's in somebody's bedroom and is only using the two little speakers in the TV.
So there isn't like an enhancement on top of DTSX where you could like shut off IMAX enhancements, and then go back to regular
No,
DTS so you can compare.
no. There's a flag in the metadata in the sound in the digital soundtrack that basically says, "Hi, I'm IMAX Enhanced. Please switch to that mode."
Right.
So, and likewise for DTS and Dolby. Oddly enough, Oro does not have that flag, which is why some of the time you may need to manually push it into Oro when you're listening to an Oro recording.
So when that flag goes off, it's got to put it into some kind of special mode.
Well, it's the flag that tells the surround processor to take advantage of the IMAX part of its decoding capabilities.
Can't you put like a little button says turn that flag off and just hear what is in the base layer, and
I
then
don't
turn it
think
on?
so.
No.
I don't think so. We can turn the up mixer on and off, so you can hear kind of uh, the native 12 channel IMAX enhanced thing versus the upmixed version. That is very easy to do.
Yeah,
Um,
I get that.
but in terms of decoding an IMAX recording using a different decoder than what it was designed for, I don't think so.
No, I mean like when the flag says, "Oh, this is now an IMAX enhanced mode," it's got to be doing something. Whereas if you didn't have an IMAX enhanced AVR or pre-pro, it would just play back regular DTSX.
Again, I don't have enough experience with
Yeah,
because I only have like the one recording so far.
yeah,
So I'm hesitant to speculate, given that I have so little experience with it so far.
yeah. Because I would like to hear what the difference would be if like you could just turn on, hey, turn off IMAX enhanced, and then listen to it regular, straight DTSX.
Yeah, I mean it's built on DTSX technology, but that doesn't mean they're exactly the same. Um, uh, if you were writing computer code, C++ is different than Fortran or Pascal, and boy, am I showing my age. But it's not like you could switch from one to the other to see how things would work. They're different. They may all be programming languages. They may all require similar kinds of logic and so forth, but they're different. And this, I think, is more in that category. The specifics of IMAX decoding, although it's based on DTSX technology, there are some things about it that go beyond what DTS chose to do with DTSX. And there are other ways in which it's more limited. I mean, DTSX was designed to be rendered to as many as 30 main speakers plus LFE. And IMAX, as all of their own promotional material has specified, is really designed more for a 12-channel implementation.
Right.
And that's why we felt that since most of our systems have more than 12 channels, that's why we felt strongly that we needed to be able to upmix to take advantage of all the speakers that people paid good money to have.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I get it.
Let's see. Oh, there is one difference. LFE, the relative level of LFE is different for some reason in IMAX Enhanced than in either DTSX or Dolby. It's like a 3 dB difference. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting 3 dB more or 3 dB less. It just means that it was mixed to that standard. And so it should be played back to that standard if
Is
you want
that
to hear what the mixer did.
is that true bass option? That's an on and off feature that you can turn on and off.
Well, I believe it will be. We're not implementing it in our version because, again, it's the kind of thing that if one of our customers wanted that effect, they could just do whatever kind of bass bump they wanted to do in a target curve, save it into a preset, and they can do exactly what they want to do rather than what somebody in California decided would be kind of cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's IMAX Enhanced.
Yeah, it's of the two things, the +4 part of the software update is quite a bit more practical, at least until we start seeing a lot more IMAX Enhanced content being streamed.
Here is another question for you. Thanks,
Alrighty.
Ray H, for the super chat. Does Trinnov have a particular DAC that they would recommend to use with the altitude?
Any normal stereo DAC that can receive coaxial SPDIF or toslink inputs can be used. And if you wanted to bring, for example, a DCS Vivaldi or an MSB DAC, or something in the tens of thousands of dollars kind of DAC, you probably would want to assign those channels to be reproducing your screen channels, since that's the most important part of the soundtrack, and that's easily done. On the other hand, if you're just driving some extra subs because you have 16 channels and you needed a couple of extra outputs for some subwoofers, I don't think it would be a good investment to spend that kind of money on a DAC. You could probably get away with one for a couple $100.
Are you guys going to have like a list of like approved DACs or that you find works
No,
best? No,
it's an
just
industry
whatever.
standard. It's not a question of whether or not it'll work. It's just plain old SPDIF and toslink. So there's really nothing to endorse or not endorse. If we were to create a list, we would almost certainly, there's no way you could have a comprehensive list of every D-Day converter that anyone is building. So we would almost certainly leave some people off the list, not because we thought they were bad, but just because we didn't know about them.
Right.
So we're not going to create a list that unfairly treats, some manufacturers versus others.
Will you make your own?
No. We did discuss that internally. We could take one of our existing boards and put it, in a metal box with a power supply and connectors and all of that. And the amount of money that it would take us to develop such a product, we'd have to sell a lot of them to recover that investment. And when you get right down to it, like I said earlier, as long as people are willing to spend a little bit of money on decent parts and they have competent engineering, I'm not talking about super high-end audio engineering, I'm talking competent engineering. The amount of performance you can get from a relatively affordable DAC nowadays is there's less and less difference over time between something that is merely competent versus some of the best stuff in the world. In the 90s, it was a huge difference, and then over time, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I think there will always be a difference, but those differences are becoming more and more subtle.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about this guy really quick? Because I know you guys just released this. The
yeah,
216.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, do you have any particular questions, or shall I just wing it?
Yeah, just wing it. What's so special about it? First of all, it's pretty small. It's got 16 channels. I think that's impressive.
Yeah, it's a 3U box. So it's about this tall. It's actually 2 8-channel amplifiers, which you can sort of see from the layout of the rear panel. There's an 8-channel amplifier on the top and an 8-channel amplifier down below, and you can see those little white things that are on a bit of a diagonal. Those indicate how you would connect things if you were bridging a pair of channels. So this can be anything from 8 channels fully bridged with a ton of power to 16 channels not bridged, still a lot of power, but not as much, or anything in between. So if you wanted, for example, to bridge your left, center, and right channels in a home theater to have a little extra power up front, that's going to use up a total of 6 channels for the 3 speakers. And then you got another 10 channels that you could use any way you want. It's incredibly flexible. It packs a lot of power into a small space. The specs are, when it's not bridged, 200 watts into 8 ohms and 400 watts into 4 ohms. And when you bridge it, it's 800 watts into 8 ohms and over 1,000 watts into 4 ohms. And the limiting factor on how much total power is available is literally the amount of power you can suck back out of the wall to replace what you just sent to the speakers.
Huh.
So if you want that last little bit of performance, you should probably run it off of 230 or 240 volt circuits rather than 120. It does, as I mentioned, it's 2 8-channel amplifiers. I'm not sure how easy it is to see in on YouTube, but there are 2 power cords, 2 power switches, it's 2 of everything. Yeah.
That's great.
And
What modules are in
between,
there?
hmm?
What modules are you guys using?
We worked very closely with the folks at Ice Power to develop this amplifier. It's actually kind of a funny story about that. I was told by one of the people who was very closely involved in the whole process that when they were talking to the folks at Ice Power, they kept, we kept saying basically, okay, so just how good could you make this? I mean, we had basic requirements of, okay, it's got to do this, that, and the other thing. But once those things are satisfied, how far could we push this? How much performance could we get? And they, at first, were a little bit disoriented by the questions, it seems. And they eventually they admitted that the reason they were a little confused at first was because in the past, everybody has come to them and said, okay, so what can we do for this much less money? And we were saying, no, we're willing to spend a little extra money if it's actually worth it. What can you do? And so the engineers at Ice Power were pretty excited to work on the project because they were given the ability to do what they really wanted to do as opposed to trying to hit a very specific price point.
So this is
And the price here in the US is $12,500, just so you know. So it's a little over $750 a channel.
Mhm. Is that all channels driven, or what is that measurement based on?
The total output, the power supply itself, if you add up the 2 power supplies, because again it's 2 amps, but if you add up the 2 power supplies, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's around 2,800 watts total available at 120 volts, assuming you have 2 circuits that can provide the power.
Mm-hmm.
At 230 or 240 volts, it goes up to 3,300 something. I think those numbers are probably on the website. Oh, look at this. You found them.
There you go.
20 there. Okay, so on the website, they're being a little bit conservative. They're saying 2,800 and 3,200 watts. I'm pretty sure I saw a number that was a little bit bigger than that, but that's close enough. We're talking about differences on the order of, a dB or less.
That's great. 16 channels in one little box.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we did, before we embarked on the project, we did some market research. And, if you look at 16 channel amplifiers, the vast majority, almost all of them, are designed for distributed audio applications where you're basically background music throughout the whole house. There was one other that we found, a 16 channel amplifier that had a couple hundred watts per channel and was clearly designed for home theater applications. But literally, that was the only one we were able to find. And this, compared to that one, this one has not only a bit more power, but it's way more flexible with all the bridging capabilities and such.
Since this is the newest amp you guys have, how much better is this over your previous amps?
I haven't heard it yet.
No, you haven't heard it?
Nope. The guys in France have heard it, obviously, but we are hoping to get at least 2 or 3 sometime this month, and however many we get, it's going to be a very small number, will be sent out to reviewers to get that process started, and then we'll have. Unless there's some sort of supply chain snafu that I don't know about, we're expecting to get production quantities in January.
I thought you would have had it at your Hartford place.
No, we are here in Connecticut. We are the distributor for Trinnov for North, Central, and South America. So this side of the planet, but all of the engineering and all the product development and everything is done over there. We're involved in conversations, but the work is all done in Europe, and the amps are built in Europe.
And when are the other units, the Altitude's going to get audio over IP going?
I don't have a firm date on that. It has slipped into next year, and that was partly because of some chip shortages, as I understand it. We are, on our side, the Dante and AES67 are being implemented through this Ravenna software stack. And so on our side, it's a lot of software development and testing to make sure that everything works smoothly and behaves itself and so forth. But there won't be any additional hardware required in the Altitude. However, if you scroll back up, if you go to the top of the page and look at the rear panel of the Amplitude 16, you can see in the top, sort of on the right-hand side, there's a slot there exactly. And that's where you'll have to put in a Dante card, which is not available yet, and it will be at some extra cost because not everybody needs or wants Dante.
Yeah.
But if you decide you want Dante, that card will be available at about the same time as the software is available for the Altitudes, and that's early next year. But I don't know how early. Certainly not January. It'll be, I imagine, in the first half of 2022. But
Interesting. All right. Another email question I got. Actually, this is from Gene over at Audioholics.
hi, Gene.
Well, while we were listening to Pink Floyd on Atmos on the Apple TV, it also happens on his Storm. He's got a Storm processor.
Mm-hmm.
When you listen to it, the track starts off in the left channel. If you jump ahead by a few seconds, then the Atmos kicks in all the way. It happens on my Trinnov. It also happens on his Storm, but it doesn't happen on his Marantz.
I got nothing. I haven't experienced that yet, and now I'm gonna have to go look because I've got an Apple TV in the room across the hall here.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah,
I forgot which album. I'm not a Pink Floyd fan, so I forgot what album it was. I'll email you though. But yeah, it's weird because he told me to check it out, and I was like, yeah, sure. I was like, your Storm is probably broken, but then it was doing it on the Altitude as well. I was like, man, that's weird.
Yeah, well, it seems like this is only an educated guess, so please take it with a bucket full of salt. But if you're using the same source and on two different products, one of which is software based on one of which is chip based, but they're both really good products. If the same basic thing is happening in these two very different products, I would be suspicious that maybe there was something a little bit funky or non-standard in what the Apple TV was sending to the boxes. And it could well be that, it's a bandwidth restriction, or I have no idea.
Yeah, weird. Yeah, check it out. Any update on MSO, multi-sub optimizer?
No, if you're thinking, so MSO, the software MSO that some of your viewers may be familiar with, that you use, you use REW, take a bunch of measurements, then use MSO to calculate, sort of the infrasonic stuff that someone has decided to extrapolate from, I don't know where, but, that we're not doing anything to try to put them out of business. That's kind of a different thing. The subject of doing high quality bass in residentially sized rooms, which, when I say a small room, I don't mean like a small room like I'm in now, but just, the kind of sizes that you'd see in a home as opposed to an auditorium. There have been a lot of PhDs who did their doctoral thesis on how to get good bass in small rooms. And so it's an area of ongoing interest and research, but we don't have anything to announce there. It'll be great someday if we decide to commercialize something. But right now, the only thing we're doing is basic research to see what can be done.
All right. Can the Amplitude 16 be used with any other system besides Trinnov?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's there's not enough room for all of those speaker connections and a whole bunch of XLRs in a 3U box. We would have, if we wanted 16 XLRs in there, it probably would have bumped up to 4U. So instead, you can see those DB25 connectors over on the right-hand side there. Each one of those carries 8 channels of fully balanced analog signal. So you have, basically 2 breakout cables that go from 8 female XLRs to a single DB25. So you have two of those kind of octopus cables um, for use with either the Altitude 16 um, or the Altitude 32 or anybody else's preamplifier. I mean, we are big fan. We don't have any single-ended inputs because we're big fans of doing things balanced. I mean, there are just so many advantages. Um, I'm sure you could wire up an adapter of some sort to make single-ended work, but everything we do is balanced, so that's what we designed it for.
So it's fully balanced, right, from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the cables, we will have those cables in stock. You can special order them from places like Sweetwater or from your favorite wire company. I'm sure they'll be happy to build one for you. We'll have some in stock here in Connecticut because you're going to need them with the Altitude 16.
Yeah. AudioQuest made some custom ones for me.
Yeah.
All you AudioQuest fans out there.
Yeah, AudioQuest and Straight Wire and Tributaries, and I mean, they're all the usual suspects are really good at doing custom cables.
Would you consider a cheaper processor with 11 channels a basic Trinnov processor, so to speak?
Would I consider doing a Trinnov processor?
No, would you consider a cheaper 11-channel processor the same as a basic Trinnov processor?
Yeah, not really. This kind of covers ground that we covered in an earlier podcast, but when the company was originally founded back in like 2000, the three founders of the company were interested in doing basic research into three-dimensional audio. You know, how to capture a complex three-dimensional sound field, say in a concert hall, store it and process it as needed so that you could then subsequently recreate that complex three-dimensional sound field in a different space, like in your living room with a bunch of speakers. So right from the very beginning, we've been very focused on high spatial resolution. And, having a high channel count is not the only way to get there, and it's not the only thing that matters. The optimizer actually was developed specifically to address the fact that even if you had identical speakers everywhere around you, they're going to be in different parts of the room, and therefore they're going to interact with the room differently, and they're going to sound different.
Yep.
And so the optimizer was designed to, first and foremost, build on the strengths of whatever speakers you have and try to help them be even better than they were designed to be to some degree. We can't make a bad speaker into a good speaker, but we can build on the strengths of a good speaker. And then it's only after we make sure that the speaker is behaving itself as perfectly as possible that we then look at things like early reflections, subsequent reverberation, standing waves, all the other things that the optimizer addresses. But so the optimizer is important in terms of spatial resolution as well. But reducing the channel count is kind of the opposite direction from where the company is always headed.
Thanks for the question, HD. One more question from me. DSU, is there a new DSU upmixer in the works?
That is being worked on. Dolby has come out with a new, I forget what they call it, but a new flavor of Dolby Atmos, an updated version. And one of the major differences between the previous version and this one is that they have made some improvements to the Dolby Surround Up mixer. And that is currently underway, and that will be in a future software release. I don't know if it'll be the next one. It might be the next one, but I just don't know.
Will that expand up to like 30 channels like the Neural X does?
I believe it will use potentially all 34 channels if they exist. And so, it's very comparable. The thing that most people are aware of is that the older DSU did not support wide channels, right, which was a fairly glaring omission in my mind. But that has been addressed. So the new version of DSU does use the wide channels.
I'm a big fan of the center surround. I've been using that too.
Yeah. The one directly behind you.
Yeah, I think sounds cool. Yeah, because I went from the 16 and I had an extra 3 channels.
Right.
I think it makes a big difference, personally.
Yeah.
Like wides and a center surround.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
What else we got here? I think that's it. That's it, John.
Okay. Well,
Anything else you want to cover?
I was mostly here to talk about the software drop. So just by way of summing up, if you're not interested in Imax Enhanced, or if you don't need the extra 4 channels, upgrading to this version of the software is not terribly important. There aren't any major bug fixes or anything like that. It's just basically these couple of new features. But if you do want to take advantage of some of these new features, or if you just want to be ready to receive the latest of what Disney Plus is streaming, the updates are pretty easy, and probably the most straightforward way to get your unit updated is just drop an email to support@trinnov.com.
All right.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. Any more questions? Like you said, email him at that email address he just gave you. Visit Trinnov.com. If you guys want to pick up a Trinnov, you can visit my partner here, valueelectronics.com as well.
Mm-hmm.
Robert will hook you up with a nice little deal there. 50% off if you mention this stream.
Really?
No,
that's quite the deal.
Yeah, he'd kill me if that was true.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.